Well, a few weeks ago, a friend of ours gave to our family a beautiful little jar of honey, a gift from Sicily. It was just a jar of honey, and honey is honey, right? It's not right. The honey that came from Italy was outstanding. And so we opened it up and we tried it, and it was so good we started putting it on everything. And the jar quickly disappeared. So thank you, Eliana, for that jar of honey. It was so good. We already knew that Italy had good coffee, and we know that Italy has good wine, and they have outstanding food, but who knew that they had great honey? It was so good. But you know, in the eating of the honey, maybe you've had this experience. I said to my wife, it seems like every single time we open up honey, in whatever kind of jar it is, if it's the squirt jar, or if it's the pour jar, or it's always somehow getting on you. Everywhere you go, that sticky honey, it's like it evaporates up into the air, and then somehow even the parts that you didn't touch are sticky. You know, you have it on your elbow, or you have it on the back of your neck. It's somehow honey just gets everywhere. And I thought maybe it was just me, but you talk to other people, and it's like honey is just sticky. It's amazing stuff. And it kind of reminds me of this. Have you guys seen these? See if I can unwrap this. We got this for our yard. In our backyard, we have bazillions and bazillions of flies. So I tried to set up fly catchers, and it actually caught everything but flies. It's so sticky, it's like you can't unstick it, and it was sticking to the leaves on the trees, and it was sticking to everything, and pretty soon I was just like, you know, it's one of those things where you're trying to get it off, and I couldn't get it off, and so here we are. I'm going to see if I can get it off so I can keep talking to you. And it's going to stay there all night long. It's really, really sticky. Well, we're continuing, and we're going to finish and wrap up our series, Confidence, tonight, and we're going to be looking at an aspect of God's character that we don't very often talk about. This idea of God's perseverance and his persistence, this idea of God's stickiness, that even when we don't want him to be sticky, somehow God is sticky. And even a small touch of him, like coming in here tonight, you're going to walk out all sticky with God. So we're going to be looking at this character trait, and I hope that you've been able to join us over the last few weeks as we've gone through this series, and really our goal was to provide some very strategic areas, specific areas where we can build and where we need to build our confidence in who God is, so that as we're walking with him and the storms of life hit us, we have places that we can hold on. Some of the areas that we've looked at, if you've been with us over the last few weeks, we looked first at we need to have confidence in what he tells us, and we can rely on that. Then we looked at this idea that we can have confidence in allowing God to be on the throne of our lives, and not putting ourselves on that throne, but being confident to let him be the Lord over our lives. Then we looked at this idea of when God doesn't move fast enough, we can still have confidence in him. When he doesn't move in the time frame that we would choose, we can still have confidence that he's moving behind the scenes, that he's hearing our prayers, and that he's on our side. Then we looked at this idea of having confidence in our weaknesses. That's a message for each and every one of us, because we all carry around different weaknesses. And then we looked at this idea of having confidences in the mysteries of God, and saying, you know, it's okay not to know everything that there is to know about God. We'll never know everything that there is to know about God, and it's okay. We can have confidence in the unknown parts of God. And then last week, which was my favorite, Pastor Chad looked at this idea of having confidence in God's word and building our lives off of God's word in every area of our lives, making that the foundation. So through this series, as the pastoral team got together and we started talking through this idea of confidence, as we said that we wanted to look at convictional anchors, or places in our lives that are strategic, holding on anchor points where we can wrap our lives, wrap our hope, wrap our hearts around these things, anchors, so that when the floods of life come in, and they're going to come in, and when the lies of the enemy come in, and when the water surrounds us and we feel like we're drowning, We have something that we can hold on to, that we've already made up our minds. We've already predetermined, this is an anchor point. I'm not letting go of this. And so the floods can come in and they can shake us, but they can't move us. And they can't move us off of the position that God has for our lives. One of these most strategic convictional areas is what we want to look at tonight. And it centers around our relationship with Yeshua, our relationship with God. It's a convictional truth about God's commitment to us, his sticky persistence in his relationship with us. And when I say it's strategic, this is what I mean. It's an area in every one of our lives where the enemy will always come and lie to us. He lies to God's people constantly in this area about God's character, about God's love for you, about God's commitment to you. And I find that as I counsel people, often, if not always, this is the area where people are struggling to grasp and to understand and to wrap their heads around that God loves them, that God has a plan for them, that God hasn't rejected them, that God's still with them. And I literally spend as much time counseling them and reminding them that God loves them as I do dealing with the problem. It sounds sort of like this: God doesn't love me anymore. God's changed his mind about me because of this situation in my life. He's not with me anymore. He's not speaking to me. He was for me. When I first came to know him, I knew him, but now he's not there. And I can't hear his voice. I've messed up. I've messed my life up so badly. And I keep falling in this same area, and I can't seem to get free. And so he's left me. He's abandoned me. How could he put up with me? He's not there for me. He might be there for other people. I believe he's there for other people, but I don't believe that he's there for me. And so I spend lots of time reminding them of God's love, because the problem behind the problem is that they've lost their confidence in God's love for them. The real problem is that they've lost their confidence. The issues that are taking place in their lives wouldn't probably be there if they had a confidence in this area. If they understood that God loved them, that he was for them, that he was working behind the scenes, that he's not working in their timing, that he has a plan for them, that he hasn't forgotten them, that he died for them for this situation. And if they had that confidence, if they had that anchor, the other issues would be moot. They would be non-existent. They would be resolved. So I spend all of my time counseling, just reminding people, God loves you. He's got a plan for your life. It's not over. The story's not over. But what does God want in all of this? From the very beginning, God wanted to establish a relationship with man that was unique. He wanted to establish a relationship that was intimate. He designed what we call covenantal love. It was going to be a relationship that stuck forever. This was covenantal relationship. This is what he established with Adam and Eve in the garden. And it was going to be a relationship that would be intimate like no other relationship, and committed like no other relationship. And this is actually what he ends up establishing with Abraham and with Abraham's children, with the children of Israel, so that the whole world would be able to see what covenantal relationship looked like, so that the whole world would be able to see this is what God is like. This is how God enters into relationship with people. This is what God's heart is to have intimate relationship with men and women and children from all races, from all peoples, from the whole world, as they looked in on the children of Israel. See, before Abraham and God's covenant with the children of Israel, there was no such thing as covenantal relationship. It didn't exist. They didn't see it in any form. They'd never seen commitment in relationship, even among families and among tribes. It was essentially You do good for me and I'll do good for you. Because see, covenant is a permanent promise. It's not a promise like if it's convenient, if it works out, if everything happens the way we think that it will, then maybe I'll stick with you. Rather, it's a lasting promise from the God of eternity who says that forever I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that this happens. This is covenant relationship. It's a one-way promise from God to stick to his people. Where God is faithful in his promise, to his promise, till the very end. And nothing swerves him from that. It's not based on what he can get out of it. It's not based on what we can bring. Rather, it's a commitment to his promise and to the person that he loves and to the people that he loves, to never leave them and to never forsake them. It's not based on what we have to offer. It never has been. It's not based on what we can bring to the table. It's not based on what we can do or what we can't do. It's not based on how good we are, thankfully. And everybody in this room needs to hear this, it's not based on how bad we are. It's not conditional on us in any way. It's covenantal relationship that God promises to be with his people no matter what. Said another way, because of this covenantal relationship that you and I have entered into with Yeshua, we can know and have confidence that God will never leave us or forsake us. Underlining the word never. God will never leave us or forsake us. That's what covenantal relationship means. God is going to stick with us thick and thin, good and bad, till the very end of time. And this was God's design for marriage, covenantal relationship. This is what marriage is. It's to represent to the world around us what real relationship looks like. It's not based on a set of circumstances, and if you fulfill your part, then I'll fulfill my part. If you do your part, I'll do my part. And if you don't, I'm out of here. That's not what marriage is. The marriage that God designed is, I'm in this for your good till death do we part. I don't care what happens. I don't care what you do. I don't care how you fall. I don't care how good you are. I'm with you to the end, till death do us part. And then for all of us that are married, we know that that's a challenge. Learning how to love like that, learning how to enter into that kind of relationship, literally we spend the rest of our lives learning how to love like Yeshua loves. That's his design for marriage. But this is a challenging idea that many, many people have a hard time wrapping their heads around. It's difficult for us because we're all used to conditional relationship. Conditional relationship says that caring and covering and love and commitment is based on something that I can do or I can't do, or it's based on something that I can be for you. It's based on how I look or how much money I have, or it's based on my personality, or it's based on if we have the right chemistry. Because we can't imagine anybody sticking with us just because they stick with us. Especially if they knew who we really were. Especially if they knew what was really in our hearts. Especially God, who really does know what's in our hearts. Especially if they saw how messy our lives are. If they saw how messy my heart is. They knew how sinful my heart is. Her heart isn't sinful, but my heart is sinful. His heart is probably pretty good. I can't really see inside of it, but he must be doing pretty good. But man, my heart's a mess. And now we can't even imagine that anybody would participate with us in life because of what's inside of our hearts. And everybody sitting in this room is sitting in the exact same position because that's our reality. That's who we are. Like many others, I I grew up understanding relationship as conditional. That's how I just understood it. And even after I came into my relationship with Yeshua, I still understood even that relationship was going to be highly conditional because it was God. And he was going to keep his commitment as long as I could keep my commitment. And there was this one passage in Scripture that cemented this idea for me. It was this idea, this story of King Saul. And I loved the whole Bible. I was devouring it in my first couple of years of coming to know the Lord. But there was this one passage where King Saul, given the new kingship of Israel, and he's given a command to destroy the Amalekites, and he doesn't do it. And boom, the story's over. He's not king anymore, and he's rejected by God. And it cemented what I already understood about covenantal relationship. Wow, this is how God is. Also, you mess up with God and you're out. And so, man, I minded my P's and my Q's for a couple of years. I was walking the straight and narrow, like watching every step that I took, because holy cow, you can't mess up, because you mess up and it's all over. And this is the way many of God's people live. I know because I counsel many of them. I know because I is one. This is how many people live, this a conditional kind of relationship with God. As soon as you mess up, it's over. You're out. The story's done. You shouldn't have messed up. Well, you know what happened? Finally, I had been sinning, but it was little sins. I had categorical sins, and there was good sins, and there was bad sins, and then there was the bad sin. And as soon as I did the bad sin, because you know it's going to happen, as soon as I crossed that threshold, story was over. I knew it. God left me. So I withdrew from the Lord. I withdrew from relationship because I knew he had rejected me. It was over. And I wasn't even the king of Israel like King Saul. So obviously he's not going to stick with me. What does he have to invest in me? So I gave up on God. I kept going to church, however. I kept coming to congregation. I stayed in fellowship. I don't even know why I did. And something amazing happened. I quit reading my word. I quit praying, because what good was it going to do anyway? God had rejected. The story was over. Something started to happen. God continued to speak into my heart. Words of love, words of acceptance, tugging at my heart, reminding me of things that he had said before, showing me things in Scripture that I had never seen before, surrounding me with good people in the body of Messiah, surrounding me with hope and with encouragement, and allowing me to use the gifts that he'd invested in me, and allowing me to participate in what he was doing in the earth. And suddenly I started to realize, maybe the story isn't over. Everywhere I went, God was there. He just kept sticking to me. No matter how hard I kept shaking him off and trying to separate myself from him, because obviously he didn't want to be with me, he was still there. I kept shaking, and every time I turned around, there he was. Still bright, still beautiful, still loving me, still embracing me. And I came to realize that maybe my picture of God is wrong. Pastor Chad reminded us last week that God's word gives us confidence. If you didn't get to hear that message, you need to go and listen to it in our archives. And you need to make God's word center in your relationship with the Lord. He gives us confidence from his word. When you do a character study on God and you look at God's character and you look at all of God's interactions with mankind from the beginning to the end, from Genesis to Revelation, how he views his creation, how he treats those that serve him, how he treats those that fall and sin, how he views our frailty and our humanness, and you get that big picture, that character study of God, you see the most amazing aspect of our God. That God, in spite of popular lie, sticks with his people in relationship, even when they sin. We see this pattern over and over again, that God doesn't give up on his people, even when he sins, even when we sin, even when they sin. And that's the part we want to hear tonight. Because this is where we all trip up. This is where I'm guessing 90% of us land. We're so overwhelmed by our own sin because it's so stinky. We can't even imagine that there's a God that's going to stick with us in spite of that sin. We can't even imagine it. We know that no human being would. If they really knew what was in our hearts, they're out of here. Who can I even tell? But God knows everything. But is he really going to put up with those things? See, God abides with us, and he continues to give us opportunity. He keeps the door open for us to come back into relationship with him, to turn our hearts again to him. He never closes the door. Never closes the door, but he never makes us go through the door either of relationship. He doesn't force us to come into relationship with him, but he leaves the door open. He allows us to come in through that door, and as soon as we turn our hearts back towards him, he's there in an instant and in a moment. He gives us free will to walk through that door. And we see this idea played out over and over in God's word, and some of my favorite are the parables that Yeshua tells us in Luke 15. He talks about the one lost sheep, that the shepherd goes and he searches until he can find that one lost sheep. We sang about it tonight. That reckless love of God, that he never gives up. He continues to search and he continues to go after our hearts even when we're ignoring him, even when we've decided we're going to sin and do life our own way. You know what's amazing to me is that we didn't tell the worship team what we were going to be speaking about tonight. And look at the songs that they put together. Look at the songs that the Holy Spirit put together to communicate very clearly to us, his people. He's going to search for us, just like that one lost sheep, or the one lost coin, or finally that story in Luke, the one lost son, the prodigal son. And all of us would say, story's over. He blew it. He's out of here. We gave him the best that we had to give him, and he abused it, and that's it. That's the end of the story. I'm not putting up with him anymore. But God gives us a completely different, upside-down picture of the Father. He doesn't chase after him. He doesn't drag him back into his house. He stands and he waits on the front porch. And he waits, and he waits. And as soon as he sees the son down the road coming, who knows how far down the road, but he recognized the shape of his son, and he ran to him, and he embraced him, and he brought him back into his house, and he had a party celebrating him. That's covenantal relationship. That's sticky God. That's how he interacts with each and every one of us. And no sin is too big. The door is always open. And one of my favorite examples of this is the story of King Manasseh in 2 Chronicles. It takes place in the northern, after the northern kingdom is captured by the Assyrians. King Manasseh is the son of the righteous king of Judah, King Hezekiah. And Manasseh grows up in this environment where Hezekiah has seen what happened when Israel sinned. And so Hezekiah takes the kingdom of Judah and he reinstitutes in lots of different ways, we're going to worship God and we're going to do it right. And Manasseh grows up inside of this environment. And as soon as Hezekiah dies, Chronicles tells us that Manasseh rebuilds all the false god altars. He begins to worship every imaginable little g god that you can even comprehend. He brings their altars into the temple of God. He sacrifices his own sons and his own daughters to Molech. and he consults with evil spirits and dead people, and he brings all of that into the kingdom. The Bible tells us that he led the hearts of the children of Israel totally astray, totally away from God. He was in all manners probably the worst, most evil of all of Judah's kings. This is who King Manasseh is. And we pick up his story. If you want to look at it, 2 Chronicles 33, and we pick it up in verse 11. And listen to this. God sent prophet after prophet to the kingdom, and Manasseh and the people would not listen. God was giving him chance after chance after chance, and he wouldn't listen. And then we pick it up in verse 11. So the Lord brought against them the army commanders of the king of Assyria, the same Assyrian army that had destroyed the northern kingdom, who took King Manasseh prisoner and put a hook in his nose and bound him with bronze shackles and took him to Babylon to be a prisoner. That's what he deserved. He was a horrible king, a terrible leader. He did everything against God that you can even imagine doing. That's what he deserves. That's where he should land. He was removed from his kingdom, removed from his family, removed from his authority, and that's what he deserved because he was an evil king. Let's read the rest of the story. You're not going to believe this. Verse 12. In his distress, King Manasseh sought the favor of the Lord his God. How many have ever been there? Don't raise your hand. And he humbled himself greatly before God, the God of his ancestors. And when he prayed to him, the Lord was moved by his entreaty, and he listened to his plea. Time out. Really, God? After all that he did, after everything that he went through, after leading your people astray, really, God? I will never forget the first time I read that. I couldn't believe it. I had to read it and read it again, and then I went into another part and read it. Really? Wait a second. That's not how the game's played. This is conditional relationship, right, God? And when he prayed to him, the Lord was moved by his entreaty. And it says, then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. Bingo. That's what God was looking for. God wanted his heart. That's what God was after. He wanted a relationship with this man. So King Manasseh was brought back to his kingdom. Who ever heard of such a thing? If you search the annals of history, it doesn't happen. He was allowed to come back to his kingdom, to his family, to his position of authority. And in that position, he got rid of, it says in verse 15, he got rid of all the foreign gods, and he removed the images from the temple of the Lord, as well as from the altars from that he had built in the temple hill and from Jerusalem, and he threw them out of the city. And then he restored the altar of the Lord in the temple and sacrificed fellowship offerings and thank offerings on it. And then he told Judah to serve the Lord, the God of Israel. You see, it's never too late. Somebody in this room and somebody online tonight needs to hear that. Maybe several somebodies. It's never too late. God never closes the door. He doesn't drag you through it, but he's never going to close it. The door is always open. And like a loving father, he will discipline us for our sin, just like we see with the story of Manasseh and many, many other stories and characters in his word. He will discipline us for sin. But discipline isn't the rejection of who we are. God hates the sin, but he loves me, the sinner. And so he's going to deal with sin. He's not going to put up with sin, but he's going to always go for the heart of the sinner, to bring them back into relationship with him forever. He never gives up. He's sticky. You can't get him off of you, no matter how hard you try. There is no solvent that can get him off. And all you have to do is get a little bit of a touch of him, like opening that bottle of honey. You let him out in the room just a little bit, and he gets all over you. And suddenly, how did I get sticky there? How did that end up there? This is God. We see it all through his word. What about Lot, who thought he'd do it his own way? And he decided to stay in Sodom and Gomorrah, and God came and rescued him in any case and delivered him and then blessed his life. How about Jacob's sons? Even after they've given one of their other brothers into slavery, sold him into slavery and lied to their father, God still uses them. He still allows them to be his representation to the rest of the nations of the world. Wow. What about Jonah, who tried to run and hide from God? We were talking at our breakfast table this week, and my son said something about this idea of hiding from God, and I said, you can't hide from God. David says, no matter where I go, to the highest mountain, to the lowest sea, to the farthest desert, I can't hide from you, God. Jonah tried to hide from God, and God used him in spite of himself to bring God's great salvation to the Assyrians. How about Samson? Now, Samson, he did the big sin, right? He really messed up. But we watch that story unfold, and as soon as Samson turns his heart to God, and he asks for help right in that moment, we get to see God's faithful character. God being faithful to his covenant to Samson, faithful to his covenant with his people, and destroying the enemies of God. See, God gives us confidence that he is with us till the very end. He's never going to give up on us, even when we give up on ourselves, even when other people give up on us, even when we sin. He's never going to quit. He's never going to leave us alone. Nothing can separate us from his faithful love, from his commitment to us, not even our worst sin. If you're a categorizer of sins like I have been, this is covenantal relationship. Listen to how Paul describes covenantal relationship. In Philippians, he says, I'm confident of this, confident, that he who began a good work in you, he will carry it on to completion. You can't get a better guarantee than that. He's going to keep doing his good work in you till it's finished. He never gives up. Wow, that's a guarantee until the day of Messiah Yeshua. Or how about God's word to the Romans? Paul again is speaking to the congregation in Rome, and in chapter 5 he says, for if when we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his son, how much more, having now been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? The Message version says it this way, if when we were at our worst, we were put on friendly terms with God by the sacrifice of his son, now that we're at our best and we're in this covenantal relationship with God, just think of how our lives will expand and deepen by means of his resurrection life. But the best comes a little bit later in Romans in chapter 8, when Paul plainly states that God has made every provision for us to be in relationship eternally with him through Messiah. He says, if God is for us, what could possibly separate us from his love for us? And by love, what Paul is talking about is that sticky kind of covenantal relationship love. A sticky God that no matter what, he's with his people. Paul says it this way, he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for all of us, how will he not also graciously give us all things, completing his work in us to the very end? Who can separate us from the love of Messiah? Troubles, hardships, persecution, family. Family is always a tough one. Who can separate us from the love of Messiah? Family? No. Persecution? No. Nakedness? Danger? Sword? He says, I'm convinced, I'm confident. This is where we wrap our lives, our hope around this confidence. I'm convinced, he says, that neither death nor life, angels or demons, present or future, nor any power, height or depth, nor anything else in all of creation will be able to separate us from God's love. That's good news. Now, you just stepped into the middle of God tonight. You got honey all over you. You're going to walk out sticky because God's sticking to you. That's who he is. That's his character. Not what the world says, that as soon as you mess up, it's over. Story's over. You blew it. Or you're such a mess up that he would never enter into a relationship with you. That's a lie. And I know because I'm human, and I know because I pastor, that the vast majority of us sitting in this room and those that are watching online still believe that God's a conditional lover of who I am. As soon as the storms rise in my life, as soon as the floods come in, as soon as the enemy starts to lie to me about who God is, about who I am, you're such a mess up. You're never going to amount to anything because you keep messing up. That's why nobody likes you. That's why there's no room for you. That's why God's not talking to you right now. As soon as those floods come in, the majority of us listen to it and go, oh yeah, I am a mess up. And instead of looking at our Savior, we look at our sin. We look at our hearts instead of looking at God's heart for us. See, there's still room on the front row for each one of us to come into his house. And he wants us to know that tonight and to walk out sticky with that truth. So I want to encourage you as we wrap up our time together tonight. The worship team is going to lead us in some worship, and our prayer team is going to come down. I'm going to invite them to come now and to come to the front. This is an area that we need to pray into because we all struggle here. I'm convinced that 90% of us are there. Very few people have I ever met in all of my life, and I'm really old. In all of my life have I met people who are confident that God loves them. They go maybe through seasons, or we go through seasons where God's done what we wanted him to do, or we had a big answer to prayer, and then we know that God loves us. But as soon as the storm comes in, as soon as the floods come in, as soon as we face obstacles and difficulties, as soon as we sin, we throw it out the window. And we forget that God promised to be with us to the very end. So I want to encourage you, don't just walk out tonight and not deal with this in your heart. Let's pray into it. Let's ask God for confidence in this strategic area. This is the area where we need to be our most confident, because this is the area where the enemy is going to come in for sure and lie to you about the character of who God is. Would you stand with me, and I'm going to invite the worship team to pray, to lead us in worship.